So it looks like the Death Guard Terminators are going to be more dangerous than ever, with some big buffs to both the Deathshroud and the Blightlords. Let's see what they can do with their attached characters and their unique detachment in the Death Guard Codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Death Guard once more, and in this video I thought we'd take a look at their rather iconic armoured elites, talking briefly about their lore and models, then going through their unique datasheets, the already Terminator focused detachment in the Codex, in the Death Lords Chosen, and then look at some of their support options with characters and other rules and detachments. Lore-wise, Terminator armoured elites tend to be some of the iconic champions of just about every Space Marine Legion out there, and the Death Guard are no exception. In the 40k era, they have two distinct types that are the most notable ones, the Scythe Arm and Deathshroud, elite bodyguards and champions fighting with great Man Reapers. Few can stand against their might, and they held back to their brothers fighting under the same name in the Horus Heresy. The Blightlord Terminators, on the other hand, are a more general-purpose shock elite of the Legion. They're clad in cataphracti Terminator armour, and go down more of the sort of mixed Terminator threat aesthetic, fighting with plague weapon in one hand and combi bolters packing virulent rounds in the other. They're a bit more of a mixed threat with some fairly fearsome firepower as well as close combat prowess, and they often get employed in ship-to-ship warfare, which isn't uncommon for the Death Guard. Currently, model-wise, their box sets are £40, €51 or $62, and that gets you a box of either 3 Deathshroud or 5 Blightlords. And there is also the option for more Death Guard Terminators with the Lord Felthius' Tainted cohort, the one with 3 Blightlords and the Lord of Contagion, and I suppose you could even dip into the Horus Heresy line if you wanted some more classical Terminators with a bit more of a clean aesthetic. They could do well for Blightlords or Heresy-style Deathshroud. Generally the miniatures are pretty well light. Chunky mutated elites of the Legion, unique Legion and chapter Terminators generally tend to go down pretty well. And I'm sure the Emperor's Children and World Eaters are eyeing the Death Guard with envy, getting 2 different types of them when Games Workshop decided to give them their sort of possessed equivalents. The Deathshroud in particular I think are loved for their iconic scythes of the Legion, but the Blightlords are maybe a little bit more of a complex kit with a bunch of different options. That Flail of Corruption is a particularly fun bit as well. Previously in game it was very much the Deathshroud dominating and the Blightlords just not really being so great, despite being about the single cheapest Terminator variant that you could field in Warhammer 40k, and Games Workshop hadn't really managed to fix that. Though it seems that interesting things happen with both datasheets in the Codex, in particular Blightlords getting way better, and Deathshroud have a scary new delivery system. As ever, if you're looking to pick up any of these guys, feel free to check out the channel's affiliate discount links linked down in the video description. They can get models cheaper than Games Workshop around the world. A big thank you to anyone buying through those, as any purchases do help to support Auspex Tactics a bit, as well as saving some money. For those watching this one early, the big Death Guard pre-order is going to go live at these times around the weekend between Friday night and Saturday morning. Hopefully Games Workshop will have made enough of the Battle Force boxes, but probably doesn't hurt to get there early if you're trying to land them at a discount either here or at other places. Let's talk rules though, and first up we have the Blightlord Terminators. I was certainly keen to see what Games Workshop did with them, given that they'd been struggling quite a bit. Previously, as mentioned, they were the cheapest Terminators in 40k, 155 points for 5 of them, and previously it was 5 or 10. So the first interesting change was that you can now field them in units of 3, 5 or 10 if you want to. That's to represent the Lord Felthius and Tainted cohort kit where you only get 3 of them. I'm not sure if fielding 3 of them will be a particularly good idea. At the moment it looks like they're around about 37 points per model or so, at least by the Codex points. They're printed at 115, 185 for 5 of them, or 370 for 10, though as ever they might well change those values when they do the digital points update. Otherwise, for some small stat line improvements, they've gone up to movement 5, they're no longer cursed with a movement 4, and at least are a tiny bit more fast at getting across the battlefield and making their presence felt, and their toughness has been bumped up from 6 to 7, similar to the Plague Marines jumping to toughness 6. That is going to make them a tiny bit harder to kill, but it's only really relevant for strength 6 and 7 weapons for the most part, or I guess maybe the old las cannon that's thrown their way. For their melee attacks they got a big boost there, mainly in their bubotic blade going to damage 2. Previously it was 4 attacks at strength 5, AP 2 and damage 1, now it's 3 but at strength 5, AP 2, damage 2, all with lethal hits of course, and I feel like that's already a bit of an improvement. Not really too bad to lose 1 attack against hordes, but at least that's going to mean that they'll go through things like standard Space Marines very quickly indeed, and at least pose a threat to enemy Terminators at toughness 5 as well. They're still not going to be all that great against things that are toughness 10 or above, but at least lethal hits will allow them to do some chip damage. They still get their Flail of Corruption, which has a bit less AP but far more attacks, and they will make some good use of Contagions of Nurgle in the fight phase. -1 toughness will be good against good breakpoints like toughness 5 and toughness 10, so I guess in reality it's toughness 11 that really is toughness 10 for these guys. They won't be so bad against things like standard Predator tanks, and the extra AP could really help with their sort of middling APs if you happen to choose that plague. Beyond that though, they've got their shooting attacks. Previously they could take 2 of their sort of plague heavy weapons, now they can take all 3 within a unit of 5 of them. So you can have a Reaper autocannon, a plague spewer and a blight launcher, all in the same unit of 5 of them, and double them up if you go to 10. Generally they're going to be more useful against lighter infantry as opposed to really tough stuff though. The Blight Launcher got an update where it gets D3 shots and blasts, so it's a fair bit better against hordes than it used to be. And their special rule got changed around. Previously it was just a fairly weak wound reroll, which almost wasn't really worth considering too much. Now it's actually something a fair bit punchier. It means that if you have a starting strength of 5 or more or an attached character to the unit, then your unit's firepower gets a +1 strength and +1 AP when you're shooting targeting afflicted units. That's anything within the contagion range, or having handed that out with multiple different ways that you can do so in the codex. I guess the +1 strength is handy enough, particularly as the unit will definitely have -1 toughness, and I guess that means that you're stacking multiple extra AP on those shots, at least if you go for that particular contagion. So it means that Blight Launchers will be hitting at AP3, which is pretty crazy, and the same for the Plague Spewer and Autocannon. I feel like between all that, that's at least a fair amount of threat. It's certainly going to stack a fair bit of damage on lighter infantry and things, and even the combi weapons will be chipping in with AP2 on the go with their lethal hits. If you go for the smaller 3-man units, then they just get more stock war gear. One of them gets the option to trade out their combi bolter for the Plague Spear, though you have to take a close combat weapon if you do that, so it's a big downgrade on the melee. I'd hope the eventual points cost on the 3-man unit will be cheap. Obviously kind of hard to say unit strength at this point, given that we don't know official points cost just yet. I feel like there's enough here to add a fair bit more interest to the datasheet though. In a bigger unit, those mass strength 5 damage 2 attacks with contagion debuffs and lethal hits are easily going to be enough to stack meaningful damage on tough stuff now, when previously they couldn't before. And their firepower got way scarier as well. They've still got a tough profile that's hard to take down. Before I move on to their rivals the Deathshroud though, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Weyland Yutani terrain. They're one option to get some functional competitive style Warhammer 40k terrain on the tabletop if you like some tournament style terrain. Their kits are made out of sturdy printed plastic card. They've got a bunch of different designs that you can put on them, with overgrown ruins or medieval castle style ones. Here's one example of their typical packs: 4 big ruins, 6 little ones, and a whole bunch of ruin footprints to define where they come up to. It might not be the right terrain set for everyone, but if you're looking for tournament style terrain or something that really favours gameplay and function maybe slightly more than form, this could be the one to go for. They also have one for the current Pariah Nexus WTC terrain pack as well, this one with a bit more emphasis on big ruins and things, plus some girder forests. And they also have some smaller sets of 3-story ruins if you just want a bit of functional line of sight blocking terrain to get on the table that's big enough to hide big stuff like Imperial Knights. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, links down in the video description below. They've got a code Auspex5 for 5% off if you do pick anything up. Moving on to those Deathshroud though, and pre-codex these guys were 110 points for 3 of them, and could be argued to be one of the very strongest Terminators in the game. They certainly didn't move fast, but they were perhaps weirdly cheap. Still getting a boosted toughness stats, -1 to wounds, and some pretty immense general purpose melee. In the codex they've had a bit of a side grade with some things, but gained one pretty enormous special rule. On the durability front they go up to 4 wounds apiece, again at toughness 7, and they also gain the 5-inch movement, so just a tiny bit faster. The 4 wounds is basically in compensation from them losing the -1 to wound rule that they had when they had attached characters. You're just going to be wounding them on normal amounts now, but I feel like that extra wound is pretty adequate trade-off for that. Things that were damage 3 that would have been killing them outright before no longer will be, which is quite a big deal for some profiles. Otherwise they do normal Terminator things with deep striking in, and they have a couple of bonus support rules. Attached characters get a 4+ feel no pain, not usually super relevant, but I guess it might stop them getting epic challenged out or something. And they also have a 6-inch aura of -1 leadership from an Icon of Despair now. Their damage output is the thing that's changed the least. They still get their Plague Spurt gauntlets with a bunch of anti-infantry 4+ torrent attacks, not usually super relevant, but could clear out a small squad of light infantry in passing or something, and even could potentially do a fair bit of Overwatch if you just desperately needed 1 or 2 casualties. Their Man Reaper still has its very general purpose, scary profile at strength 8, AP2 and damage 2 with lethal hits. 4 attacks hitting on 2s there is all very scary, and particularly with -1 toughness and extra AP on the go, there's not much they won't clear out in melee in a couple of turns. Their sweep profile has been altered a bit. Previously it was 6 attacks at strength 5 AP 0, now it's a big 8 attacks at strength 4 AP -1, and that would do enough to actually make it the go-to against 1 wound infantry in quite a big way, and just makes them extra nice at vanquishing hordes, even if that's not really their prime target. The sweep attack does only hit on a 3+ though, so the 8 attack thing maybe is a little trade-off. The seriously scary thing on their datasheet though is their death approaches special rule, and this one is a close deep strike and charge style special rule, provided that you're doing it against afflicted units. When you're setting them up from deep strike, basically they have to set up greater than 9 inches away from non-afflicted units, so the ones that don't have the contagions on them, just like normal deep strike. But anything that is afflicted, they only deny deep strike out to 6 inches, so you can put the Deathshroud Terminators right down there, have a very easy charge, and with a command reroll that should be near enough guaranteed unless you're incredibly unlucky. There's lots of ways to make units afflicted between multiple different detachments, but in general though, if they can just coordinate with one forward element of your army, handing out Nurgle's gifts to units nearby, they should be able to have a very easy charge on that unit. Overall that does look pretty terrifying. I wouldn't be too surprised if they go up in cost. As a result of this, their printed cost is 160 points or 320, which would be a big jump. I'm not sure if that might be a bit too much to bear, though I'm still not putting too much stock on the printed costs until we actually get the downloads. Either way though, they could still be delivered by rapid ingress if you'd like to, as they have been in the past. For leader options, they've got 3 different choices. The Lord of Virulence is 80 points. He's fairly similar to how he was before, his melee being a touch more accurate now, but he looks like he would make a Blightlord Terminator unit seriously shooting. While he's leading them, they'd be able to re-roll wound rolls, so should be wounding with quite a lot of those potentially quite high AP attacks, and you can mark 1 unit where all your Death Guard units get to re-roll hit rolls of 1 against them, or all hit rolls with blast weapons, so nice for blight launchers and things. Feels like he's more suited to leading the Blight Lords rather than Deathshroud. The Lord of Contagion looks like he's an absolute melee machine though. He still gets his punchy damage 3 Man Reaper, now buffed up to strength 9. Its sweep profile was also improved a bit. He gets the absolutely massive melee damage buff though of melee weapons getting sustained hits 1 and lance, and that just looks utterly brutal on Deathshroud. Him with a unit of them just looks like he'd threaten to kill or take an enormous chunk out of most things in the game. He also has a respawn on death type special rule, which might even incentivize running him solo with that one. Feels like he'd be very tempting for a unit of Deathshroud, and even could make a unit of Blightlords far scarier with lance. Finally, we've got Typhus himself. Pre-Codex he was kind of auto-include at 80 points. In Codex he's printed at 105, but I guess we'll see what they do. He's generally quite similar. A Lord of Contagion with slightly improved melee. Now he gets 6 attacks rather than 5. -1 to hit in melee, which will help keep either flavour of Terminator safe. And he gets his Psychic Mortal Wound attack, which can rebound on him, but usually just belts out a fair few mortal wounds against something. Still a pretty reasonable chance that he'll kill things to rival his points cost, if he can activate that a few times in a game. Next up, we've got the Terminator flavoured detachment for the Death Guard, and this one's called the Death Lords Chosen, and this one's themed around Death Guard elites and Terminators led by characters. Certainly looks like one of the strongest if you want to run Terminator heavy forces, maybe rivaled by the Flyblown Host potentially. The core rule for the detachment is Deadly Vectors, and interestingly enough this one's a damaged one that affects afflicted units. In your opponent's command phase, you roll a 2d6 for each afflicted unit, and if the result is 6 or less, the enemy suffers d3 mortal wounds, and if the enemy happens to be below half strength, then you get -1 to that roll. So it'll trigger on a Holy 7 or less. Usually that's going to mean that every afflicted unit gets a 42% chance of taking d3 mortal wounds in their command phase, going up to 58% if they happen to be below half strength. This one isn't really quite so Terminator focused, though I guess gives you some good incentive to push your units up into the enemy army. Make sure that lots of them are staying afflicted for as long of the battle as possible, as if you do they'll be taking a whole bunch of damage and might even potentially put some units in a position where they're wiped out before they score an objective, or have to test Battle Shock before they score an objective, both of which could be a bit annoying. For the stratagems though, and this is where the Terminator synergies really come in, basically all the stratagems are locked to Terminator keyword units. It'll mean you'd want to go really heavy on the Terminators if you are taking this. First up, for 1 command point, we've got Blooming Pestilence. 1 Terminator unit gets a +3 inch to contagion range at the start of any phase. I feel like first thought for that one could be to hand out the detachment rule on a few more things that wouldn't be affected by it otherwise, if that makes a difference. Though it could be good for both the Terminator variants, Blightlords getting their strength and AP buff, or maybe a unit on the board, making a unit afflicted so that Deathshroud can close deep strike next to them. For 1 command point, there's Grim Reapers, that allows you to reroll hit rolls against enemies that aren't monsters or vehicles. That's quite a solid damage boost in the fight phase there. Feels like it's maybe a little bit more relevant for the Blightlords versus Deathshroud that hit on 2s anyway. Maybe just a touch frustrating that you can't use it against monsters and vehicles, as they'd be the exact things that you normally want to. Maybe even fishing for some lethal hits with Deathshroud could certainly make Blightlords scary enough though. For 1 command point, there's Undying Spite. That gives you fight on death on a 4+ if you've not already fought for your Terminators. Always useful to have for any sort of melee focused unit, and Deathshroud Terminators seem easily threatening enough to justify that on, and the sort of unit that might trigger a big enemy mainline damage dealer charging into them to try and wipe them out. Potentially that could be pretty big. For one command point, there's Signal Pox. This one's a Lord of Virulence specific one, doing a bit of commanding of the ordnance. In the command phase, you can select an objective within 30 inches and visible to a Lord of Virulence. Until the start of the next turn, enemy units within range of that objective are afflicted. Again, could be good with both Terminator's datasheet rules, Blightlord shooting or Deathshroud, trying to land close and charge things, though pretty good for other things as well, maybe amping up some Plague Burst Crawler firepower paired with the Lord of Virulence special rule. For one command point, there's Mortarian's Teachings. That gives you assault and heavy keywords for Terminator's weapons shooting. I guess in theory that could be alright for a really big unit of Blightlords where you might be able to justify it. I feel like the heavy part of it is unlikely to ever be too relevant. You just want to be moving them as fast as possible. And if they can't charge this turn, then maybe the assault keyword could be worth the investment. Just seems like it could be a bit borderline value for the damage output on a unit of 5 though. Finally, we've got Sickening Impact for one command point. Terminators on the charge get 1 mortal wound on a 2+ for every model that they can end with an engagement range. So basically sort of Terminator tank shock pretty much, though you're unlikely to get 2 really big numbers rolling at that just due to big bases mainly screening each other out for engagement range. They can only take a 6 mortal wound maximum out of it, but that could easily be good for something like 3 or 4 mortal wounds if you can get a fair few in. I guess in particular that could help Blightlords take down tough stuff. Overall, some fairly good Terminator support there. Fights on Death, boosted contagion range, and handing out contagions on objectives for Lords of Virulence all seem pretty handy with their datasheet rules, and 2 ways to get a bit of extra damage in the fight phase, re-rolling hits against non-vehicles or the tank shock style one. I feel like most of them seem like solid value, but maybe not crazy standouts. Finally, for enhancements, they're all locked to the Terminator units once again, so that's the Lord of Contagion or Virulence. The Face of Death is 10 points and makes enemies in engagement range trigger Battle Shock at the start of the phase. Not really quite so great in my opinion there. Vile Vigor is 15 points printed. That gives you +1 movement and re-rolling advanced rolls for the bearer's units. I guess that means that you could have 6-inch moving Blightlords advancing a big distance at least fairly reliably. I guess that could pair pretty well with the advance and shoot stratagem. I don't think that's too bad, but at 15 points maybe just feels a touch on the borderline side. The Warp Rot Talisman is 30 points, and this one's a fun return to reserves for a Terminator unit once per game at the end of the opponent's turn if you're not in engagement range. This one could be used for say some Deathshroud starting on the board. If your opponent goes first, then potentially that could allow them to do a first turn deep strike and charge if you'd like to. I guess you might have a bit of a difficulty getting units within contagion range, but if you could, then that could get Deathshroud into combat near guaranteed right from turn 1, which is kind of interesting. I guess maybe pair with some Poxwalkers infiltrating up into the mid board for that. Then finally for 20 points there's the Helm of the Fly King, and while leading a unit they can't be shot at greater than 18 inches away. That seems like quite a nice one for a foot-slogging Terminator unit, just very problematic for such a big, scary and durable unit just not being able to be interacted with over that distance, and could give enemy firepower problems deciding whether or not they want to get close to the scary Terminators or remain at a safe distance. Out of the enhancements, I think I like these 2 the best. Returning to reserves and shenanigans like that are always quite fun, and the 18-inch can't be shot thing. That's a pretty big deal on such a scary unit. Overall feels like there's a fair bit of interesting value here. I guess it is really tying itself in, needing the Terminators to be efficient datasheets that you'd want in good numbers at the heart of the army. Fingers crossed they'll give them a points cost that allows that. Otherwise, for other supporting rules for the Terminators, we've already mentioned Nurgle's Gift a fair bit. -1 toughness and extra AP amps up their damage, and -1 to hit could make them yet more survivable, and even the OC1 could make them a lot more credible at contesting objectives against enemy troops. Extra AP and debuffing toughness to help out their damage outputs in respective ways are both really nice though. For generic stratagems, rapid ingress could be used to get either flavour of them into combat reliably, not too bad with slow movement characteristics, and both could be used for Overwatch pretty well against lighter infantry. You probably wouldn't want to do so against anything particularly sturdy, but if you just need to kill a few light infantry and that's going to make a big difference to the game, could be worth it. Command rerolls will be great value for charges, and maybe heroic intervention to support other Terminator units, or having Mortarian nearby could be nice. They've got the durability to be able to take a beating, and could be a great thing to mob up on the enemy with if they charge one unit that's too close to another. Otherwise, there are some datasheets that can interact with the Terminators in different ways. Mortarian's buffs seem well suited to them if you're not using them on the Demon Primarch himself. Reactive moves on slow-moving Terminators are really big, and the fights on Death could be particularly nice for Deathshroud to get that going on a 2+. Otherwise, for datasheet synergy, the Foot Demon Prince could hand them out some decreased cost stratagems and the benefit of cover as they move up the board, and he could use a Land Raider to deliver them into close combat. They changed the transport capacity on that so it can fit 14 models in. So basically would also allow 6 Deathshroud Terminators plus a leader for them, so that's a pretty potent melee combo there. Delivering them out to an average 20-inch charge threat range feels like it could be enough to justify one. Otherwise, being fighty Death Guard infantry that both have range and melee threat, almost every detachment has at least something relevant for them. For a few highlights, the Virulent Vectorium can get wound rerolls against an afflicted unit when shooting. That could be nice for the Blightlords. The -1 damage could make either of them far more survivable. Having that paired with 4 wound Deathshroud is just incredibly tanky. The Champions of Contagion are great with leader related things, most of their stratagems are locked to that, and these are both units with good leaders. There's the 5+ critical hits for 1 command point, which seems absolutely monstrous when combined with a Lord of Contagion and some Deathshroud. That'd be lethal and sustained hits all on a 5+, and then any attacks with the sustained hits will also have Lance on the way in. That's some pretty mad big damage there. There's one for rerolling wound rolls against enemies below starting strength, and one for a +2 toughness boost. Maybe again jumping to toughness 9 doesn't tend to be crazy impactful, but could be really big against some things like plasma fire. Mortarian's Anvil could throw out some contagions at long range, and that could have really good synergy with the Deathshroud in particular. You could throw contagions against an enemy unit, and then know that you can deep strike your Terminators next to them and get them into some near guaranteed melee. And you could also do similar to line up some Blightlord shooting if desired, and they could use the reroll hit stratagem targeting enemies in their deployment zone. The Taliban is maybe a bit more niche, but that's got a 1 command point reroll hits when fighting the same thing as a Nurgle Demon. Maybe could be alright in the pinch. Deathshroud already hitting on a 2+ though, maybe make that a little bit less standout. Finally, there's the detachment that doesn't revolve around the new codex though in the Flyblown Host, which I think has got way better given the contagions will be available for this now when previously they weren't. Stealth for infantry units is really nice, so you can always take the AP damage one, and you get Scouts 5 inches for infantry units not in transports, so you can have loads of Terminators in the midfield really quickly. There's plenty of other good stratagems as well. There's a Consolidate one for 6 inches, where any extra movement on these guys is going to be a big deal. A pistol keyword one for Blightlords firing in close combat, and reroll ones for Blightlords once again, making their shooting a bit more savage. Also a nice -1 to wound one as well near a Mephitic Blight Hauler, which means that you could have 4 wound Deathshroud with -1 to hit and -1 to wound, or with their new 4 wound profile, which again sounds very hard to deal with. Feels like the Flyblown Host definitely has some good competition for best Terminator detachment, and honestly wouldn't be too surprised to see it be the stronger one compared with the Codex one at first impressions. I look forward to hearing your takes on that down in the comments though. In any case, I'll leave that there for now. Let me know your thoughts on the new Terminator datasheets, their special rules, and their themed detachment. Look forward to hearing all your takes down in the comments. As mentioned, feel free to check out all the discount retailers linked down in the video description for when the Codex pre-orders go live. I'll put the pre-order times on screen now. And of course a big thank you to Weyland Yutani for sponsoring the video. You can check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like some WTC terrain. There's a code Auspex5 for 5% off if you did want to take a look over their stuff. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly be keeping the regular 40k videos coming with new ones out just about every day. Hopefully the next one should be the Death Guard Codex review. If you'd like to support the channel, then check out the affiliate discount retailers in the video description or the channel's Patreon page. A massive thank you to anyone supporting there. But in any case, an absolutely huge thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.